Thomas Miller served as U.S. ambassador to Greece from 2001 to 2004. He's currently president and CEO of the International Executive Service Corps, and he joins us from our Washington bureau. Mr. Ambassador, welcome back to Bottom Line. Pleasure to have you on.
Thank you, Mark.
Sir, Greece's austerity measures, they've been in place for almost 2 years, and there have been 2 international bailouts worth about $150 billion each. And there's even talk now of possibly firing thousands of public sector workers in Greece, where state employees have guaranteed jobs for life. And then further, on Sunday, the Greek government imposed a new 2-year property tax. Why hasn't then this been enough to stop the bleeding?
Well, it takes a lot. What the international community with the EU and the IMF have asked for is a tremendous amount. And frankly, Greece has not had a tradition of having a very vibrant tax collection system. And as you said, civil servants are guaranteed their jobs for life. So this has been a struggle for Greece. I've talked to a lot of friends and colleagues in Greece. I know they're making an honest effort. I think Prime Minister Papandreou is very, very sincere, and Finance Minister Venizelos. But it's hard. As Chancellor Merkel said, this is a step-by-step process. It's not going to just come by wishing.
Sir, when you and I spoke on this program back in June, you acknowledged that the fiscal problems in Greece aren't new, that the crisis has been unfolding for at least the last 25 years. How do you right a fiscal ship that's been taking on water for the past quarter of a century?
Well, I don't think you can do it overnight, Mark, and I think that that's just a realization that people have to come to. When you've had problems that have been going on for decades, it's not going to just come by wishing and by belt-tightening to the point that it strangles people overnight. You're looking at a GDP decline this year and next that's quite significant. And clearly, Greece is making, I think they're making very, very serious efforts, but it's going to take a while. It's not going to come overnight.
Mr. Ambassador, the former Bank of England advisor Mario Bledger told Bloomberg News that Greece should default on its bonds to stop a deterioration of the economy. He said, quoting here, "Greece should default, and default big. You can't jump over a chasm in 2 steps." Should Greece default on its bonds?
Look, I think there's as many opinions out there on this one, Mark, as there are significant players in the field. There are some people who are advocating this. There are others who are saying, like the Chancellor, like others, that I just read about a couple of senior IMF officials that said, no, stay the course. My sense is, Greek bonds, if you look at the way the market's pricing them, they're heavily discounted right now. And the questions are, frankly, much bigger than just Greece alone. The questions are the future of the EU, of the Eurozone. The questions are very political questions in a number of European countries. And they also impact on us, because U.S. banks have a significant amount of holdings, money market funds in European banks.
Yesterday, Germany's economy minister published an op-ed suggesting that what he called an orderly bankruptcy of Greece must be an option. If Greece were to seek court protection from its creditors, that would allow it to avoid repaying some of what it owes. But what would that mean for European banks that own billions in Greek debt? Today, Mohamed El-Arian of PIMCO told Bloomberg that Europe's getting close to what he called a full-blown banking crisis.
Well, again, I think there are others who are more had greater expertise in this than me, but I think you've put your finger on really the central question that is really troubling markets around the world, and that's the holdings of the European banks and how those holdings would take a hit if there was a default or a write-down. And the fact of the matter is, in the deal that was made just a few months ago, the deal actually calls for a 21% write-down in the current bonds and exchanges. So we're talking about degrees here, and we're talking about confidence. And the key, I think the key in all this, Mark, is to kind of stabilize this crisis of confidence that we have right now.
Ambassador Miller, how exposed are U.S. banks at this point?
Well, again, there are others who are in better position to answer this than me, but directly by holding Greek bonds, not much. Indirectly by holding debt in or loans to European banks, what I understand, much more, and particularly U.S. money market funds that have traditionally held a lot of funds in European and in some of these European banks, particularly French banks, that are most exposed. And so those of us in the United States who say this is a European problem, that's not really accurate.
Well, then break that down for a lot of people here, because you have that disconnect in some parts of the United States. We have our own fiscal problems here, of course, but if people are looking at this from the outside in, kind of give them a sense of why they should care, why there are ramifications, serious ramifications for the United States if Greece does in fact default.
Well, we live, whether we like it or not, whether you agree or disagree, we live in a very interconnected world economically. And what happens in Europe and what happens in Asia, for that matter, and what happens in China, what have you, it does have an impact on what's going on in this country. And I think that I've talked about the large exposure that U.S. banks have with European banks. The fact of the matter is that this is the world we live in today, and it is very, very interconnected. So this is not one that we can ring fence and say this is a European problem. Clearly, the Europeans are much more exposed than we are, but we will take a hit as well if that's to happen. Well,
representatives from the European Commission, the European Central Bank, and the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, they're due back in Athens this week. Will they provide Greece with another round of bailout funds, which are conditional on Greece dealing with its budget deficit and instituting reforms?
Well, that's a $64,000 question, Mark. If I knew that, I'd be investing right now. I don't know any more than anyone else. I do know that the latest effort to try to close the revenue gap between what is expected and what Greece has raised, done just a few days ago when the finance minister of Greece proposed a $2 billion property tax, which will be collected by basically with when Greeks pay their electric bills. I hope, I'm hopeful that that goes a bit of the way toward addressing the European concerns. I saw some comments by some IMF officials that spoke to that, and they seemed to think that this was quite helpful. But these are decisions; these are hard decisions, and it's a slippery slope. I personally believe that I've seen Greece going through a tremendous amount that I would have thought was impossible just a couple of years ago, to try to belt-tighten, to try to act responsibly.
Right.
And I would hope that they would be given a little bit more time. It still is a place that has a lot of attractiveness for investors. It's a great place for tourism. And I think there's a lot of assets there.
Yeah, Mr. Ambassador, final 30 seconds. Germany being the largest and strongest economy in the Eurozone, how much pressure is there on Angela Merkel and Germany to step up and provide leadership and assistance at this point?
Well, I think she's getting pressure on both sides. I think she's getting pressure from within her own coalition, as well as the entire political system in Germany. I think there's a lot of pressure from those who'd like to see Greece get a bit more of a chance. And she is clearly in the catbird seat on this.
Thomas Miller, he served as the U.S. ambassador to Greece from 2001-2004, current president, CEO of the International Executive Service Corps, joining us from Washington. Mr. Ambassador, always a pleasure to get your perspective. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Mark.